Hello, I'm Dr. Cathy Pratt, and I would like to welcome you all to the Family Zoom on Addressing Behavior, Tips and Strategies. I'm the director of the Indiana Resource Center for Autism and also of the Indiana School Mental Health Initiative. And you will see on this slide my email address and also the address for our website, and I would encourage you to look at it. I'm blessed with an incredible staff that writes really wonderful articles, and we have a lot of visual supports on our website. So today I'm going to be talking about all behaviors, whether it's what we talk about as behavior deficits, so refusal or withdrawal, or the individual just will not do what we're asking them to do. And then behavior excesses, which are referred to as things like aggression, property destruction, self-injurious behaviors, and others. You list it, and this kind of refers to all of it. I think the other thing that you need to know is that the strategies that I'm going to be talking about, the framework that I'm going to be talking about, impacts is relevant to everybody all across the spectrum, and it's also relevant for those who do not have a diagnosis. Behavior is behavior, and so you may pick up tips that will work with other people in your life as well. So tip one, there's a difference between proactive and reactive programming. Proactive is when we're talking about behavior support plans that we're teaching the individual how to do something different. We're building in environmental supports, we're building in sensory supports. And then reactive programming is when you are in crisis and you're dealing with those crisis situations. And so the major emphasis should be on avoiding major behavioral outbursts. And so we want to remain in proactive as much as possible. And just so that you know, we're going to be talking about the importance of teaching children alternative ways of responding. Know that the best time to really address behavior is when behavior is not happening. That's when we start teaching individuals different ways of responding. So if you are in crisis with your child, it may be helpful to pursue some support through your schools, your ABA programs, medical providers, or others, or feel free to email me to problem solve through some of the issues as well. So know your hot buttons. So I know that, for example, my hot button is that I have a hard time with children who whine. I've worked with students for years who have behavior difficulties, but whining is my hot button. And so I think that all of us need to understand kind of what gets to us, what that hot button is. And, when a child is escalating, and as a general rule, stay calm, do not show emotion. Children are going to have a hard time regulating if we cannot self-regulate. They're really going to be building on our anxiety and our stress and our emotions. So as hard as it is, we have to stay really calm, even in the midst of chaos. And I think it's important to remember that all of us do best in environments that are calm. Again, reduce your comments, and know when to step away and give the individual a little bit of space. Your family may need to have a plan to keep all safe, including your child exhibiting the behavior problem. And again, if you need some help with going through that process, let us know. So the goal is not to control the situation or to get the last word in. For many years, I was a teacher working with students on the autism spectrum who had very significant behavior issues. And when I tried to act as if I could control the situation, or I got into these power struggles where I was going to win and they were going to lose, really nobody won. And so really the goal is really safety for all involved, everybody in your household. And so what we want to do, and we're going to talk more about these, how we proactively teach kids, but when you have a child who has a tendency to go in crisis mode, to have escalating behaviors, we want to talk about how to proactively teach them how to cope, and by either deep breathing or counting to 5 or going to a room to regroup so that they can be prompted to practice when upset. Last week I was in an adult program, seeing adults with significant disabilities, so many of them who were on the autism spectrum. And one of the things that I really realized the importance is that we give individuals skills. So when they go to adult services are going to be very different than school-based services are. And so we really have to make sure that we think about how do we give children skills so that when they're not around us, they're in stressful situations, they are able to kind of regroup. So tip 3, understand that behavior is just a symptom of a larger underlying issue. So I use the analogy, I've inherited a Greek mother who is 92 years old now, 93 years old, I'm sorry. And several years ago, she started losing weight and started having chronic headaches and a whole host of other symptoms. And so she would go to various doctors who would treat those symptoms. And then she finally went to a doctor who said, ran tests to figure out what was going on, found out that she had lymphoma. And when her spleen was removed, it threw her into remission. And so if we had only treated the symptom and not looked at the underlying issue, then we would never truly resolve the behavior. So if your child is hitting or kicking or screaming or whatever they're doing, those are symptoms that are telling us that something else is going on in the individual's life. And so we have to kind of step back and assess what really is happening. Because if we don't get to the heart of the problem, we will just never get this situation resolved. So the other thing that's really apparent to me is that sometimes we forget to ask the person what's going on. We need to work together with the individual to identify problems that are leading to behavior challenges. We have used a lot of the work of Ross Green, and if you haven't read his materials, it's really great. And he talks about working with kids to help them identify what the problem is, what is that they're having difficulty with. So he puts together statements like, child is having difficulty making good choices, person is having difficulty eating dinner with the family. So when we really understand what the problem is, then we can start focusing on solutions. And I think, even if the person is nonverbal, and I've worked with many individuals who are nonverbal, they are telling you what is bothering them. Remember, as a teacher, I had a student who was very apparent that what he was telling me is that he loved and needed deep pressure. And he told us that because of his self-injurious behaviors and because of some of the other things that he did. So realize that our folks, whether they're verbal or not, are communicating with them. And also understand that all behavior is communication. So tip 5 is even your children need to establish a trust and rapport with you. And they need to believe that you will listen to their challenges. They need to believe and trust that you will deal with their challenges in a way that is productive, whether they're verbal or nonverbal. And so relationship building will be key in all aspects of behavior programming. And, if they fear you, if they fear your response to their behavior, or if they fear you, they may respond reactively in that moment out of fear, but that is not going to end up resulting in a long-term relationship where the child is able to really build future skills. So tip 6 is too often we focus on consequences. And, it's important to understand what consequences mean and from the perspective of a behaviorist. So I'm a board certified behavior analyst. And so from a behaviorist perspective, the only definition of consequences is that it comes after a behavior. The only definition of reinforcement is that it increases a behavior. And so, whether it's a token or it's candy or it's food or it's praise, as long as it reinforces the behavior. And for example, I know some children on the autism spectrum who do not like to be praised. So for them, praise is not a reinforcer. On the other hand, punishment decreases behavior. And so whatever we do, if it's removal, if it stops the behavior, if it decreases the behavior, then it's punishment. So one of the realities that I want you to think about is, a lot of times in our schools, we use suspension and expulsion. And I tell people in our schools that many of our kids would rather be home than at school. And so for them, actually, suspension and expulsion is a reinforcer instead of a punisher. We have to really think, that and realize that we intentionally or unintentionally reinforce problematic behaviors all the time. And so one of the problematic behaviors that is a real common one, and I understand that we can't let kids run. We've got to keep them safe. We can't let them run into the street. I've worked with a lot of students who are runners, but we have to be very careful because running can become a game. And so when you get into the role of chasing a child, that may only increase their running behavior. And so as I've worked with runners as a teacher, a lot of what I've done is try to decrease the opportunities for them to run. And I bring up running because elopement running is a real problem in the autism community. As a matter of fact, it is one of the leading causes of death amongst children on the autism spectrum. So it's really important if your child has that behavior to really look at a plan that will help them. I think the other thing that we have to understand is the role of trauma and stress on your child. And one of the reasons that we started the Indiana School Mental Health Initiative is that we realize that there's a population of children that we work with who also have co-occurring mental health issues. Obviously, anxiety is a major one for them. And so that trauma may be caused by just having the neurological disorder of autism. It could be caused by treatment approaches that have been used in the past. It could be used by punitive strategies that have been used in the past. It could be caused by relationships that have gone awry. And so what we know about children who are in stress brain, children who have trauma, is that they often go into this fight or flight mode. So a friend of mine explained it this way. She said, you know, if you think about you're walking in the woods and you see a bear, you right away would run or have some kind of fear response. Realize that for some of our kids, they're always in that fight or flight mode. They're always facing that bear. So understand, you know, the role of stress. And we talk a lot of times, oftentimes about behavior as being stress behavior for children. You know, tip 7 is work as a family unit to resolve difficulties and to find solutions that are acceptable to all involved. You know, I'm a great supporter in looking at the entire family unit, you know, making sure that your children without disabilities have the care that they need, and that whatever you do as a family unit, that it looks at the needs of everybody involved. This is, you know, you're in this for the long haul. And I think that's the difference, is that for those of us who work with students year to year as teachers, we see them for a short period of life. This is for all of you. You have to think about the long haul in their life. And so find the solutions that are acceptable. So tip 8, and you know, I think that this is the most important thing to realize, is that we have to really identify the skill deficits that children have and specify the alternative skills or replacement behaviors. So oftentimes when I look at IEP goals, there'll be things like the student will stop running, the student will stop hitting, the student will comply. And I don't know what that means, but there are a lot of behavior goals that are focused on what children will stop doing. If you do not identify what the child will do instead, if you cannot identify that alternative or replacement behavior, don't expect for the challenging behavior to go away long term. The other part of it is that replacement behavior has to be as efficient and as effective as the problem behavior. So let me give you an example of a communication one. I went to see a young man a few years ago who had a communication system. And so he had his board on the desk, and he was using the board to communicate with people. And they had told me that the communication device wasn't working. And so as I was watching him, he was pointing to pictures on the communication device, but nobody was listening to him. And he pointed harder, and still nobody listened. And finally, he threw the communication device on the floor and banged his head on the table, and then people listened. So the alternative behavior that they had given him was not as efficient or as effective as the problem behavior. So if we are teaching children coping strategies, if we are teaching them strategies in terms of emotional regulation, we have to make sure that we pay attention to those behaviors as much as we do to challenging behaviors. So always think about what you want your child to do instead of what you want them to stop. And we, again, know that's the only way to change behavior in the long term. So some of the alternative skills that we look at are problem-solving skills, choice making. It is really important that kids know how to make good choices, and that starts from a very young age. And a lot of research that talks about when kids are given the opportunities to make choices, that actually participation increases and behavior decreases. So making sure that they know how to make choices. And sometimes in the beginning stages, it's just a choice between a preferred and a non-preferred item. Helping them with controlling their anger, identifying kind of the triggers for themselves. We have talked about relaxation training with some individuals. self-management or control, communication, and communication is really critical. And if I could just ask one thing of all of you is to think about how your child is going to communicate for the rest of their life. Um, Again, I was just in a program seeing some adults recently, and it was really clear that this man that I was spending time with, that one of the challenges for him was that he could not communicate. His behavior was his only communication system. And I was reading through his files, the comment was made that his family had chosen not to give him a communication system because they could anticipate what he wanted. So unless you plan to be with your child until they die, you need to think about how they're going to communicate with other folks. And so, having AAC devices, sign language, whatever it is, but we need to make sure that individuals have a system of communication. And as a professional who's been in this field for a long time, what I will also tell you is, I tell parents if I had a child on the autism spectrum and my child got speech therapy 3 times a week, I would be furious. If they got it 4 times a week, I would be livid beyond belief. If they got speech therapy 5 times a week for 30 minutes, I would be so angry. Because what you have to understand, communication is not about going to the speech therapy room. Communication is about how does my child communicate at all moments. And it involves all of us getting involved in that process and really enhancing those skills for kids. Social skills, which are so difficult for our kids. And so they know how to engage in social skills in across settings, in school settings, in home settings, in family environments, when they go into the community. Grit and resilience is so important. And I think, if you look at the success for individuals on the spectrum, what we know is that those individuals who develop some resilience, that they actually have a greater sense of opportunity of being successful. So resilience is developed by, sometimes individuals have to learn that they're not always going to be first in line, or they're not always going to win. Sometimes we have to kind of push people to a little discomfort, always having a safety net underneath them. But, sometimes we cannot over accommodate, but we have to help them kind of develop some skills of resiliency. Self-regulation and emotional regulation are really critical skills. And again, we have a lot of tools for those. So now what? I think learn the individual's triggers. Know what triggers them. Are there certain sounds? Is it certain requests that are being made? Is it that they're being expected to do certain tasks? What is it that actually triggers their behavior? Is it sirens outside? Is it a lot of noise in the household? Is it a certain TV program? But understand a little bit what their triggers are. You want to support, but do not overly support. And again, enhance that resilience. And so I want to explain this in terms of this idea about balancing accommodation and assimilation. So I don't live with a child on the autism spectrum. And so I know, you all have to make choices on a continual basis about the battles you choose and what you don't choose to do. And I am making no judgments about that. But what I know is that the unemployment rate and the success rate for our adults on the spectrum is not great, And sometimes when we really accommodate the individual a lot, we accommodate them right out of opportunities. So there was a young man that I was working with that if he didn't like the TV show that the parents had on, they changed it. If he didn't like the clothes that the parents had bought him, they bought him new. If he didn't like what the parents had cooked for dinner, they cooked something different. And unfortunately, he was accommodated so much that when he graduated and as they started looking at adult options, his options were few because the world is not going to accommodate everything that we want accommodated. And so, again, we have to help individuals kind of assimilate into our society a little bit more. We also want to make sure that we engage people in motivating activities and things that are meaningful for them, is that individuals will be more willing to do things and want to do things. And, our folks on the spectrum tell us what's motivating and what's meaningful for them because, through their special interests and stuff. Know how your child learns. Many of our children learn through visual means. Again, we have a whole list of or a whole catalog of visual support, but know how your child learns best. Many of our kids are hands-on learners. They may learn through video modeling, which is a great way to teach kids appropriate behaviors. And then again, build in choice into the day. And we really have to make sure that kids know how to make choices and good choices. And then be present. I think, I'm a grandmother to four grandsons, and my grandkids are wonderful. And one of the things that I've realized that's so important is the importance of just being present and just spending time. And I think sometimes we're just not. I know that in this age of technology, we're all on our technology so much that we sometimes forget to be present. Some of our folks have sensory needs, and we really need to make sure that we address those sensory needs, fidgets or whatever it is. I was working with one young man, and he had extreme behaviors, and the behavior consultant had suggested that whenever he acted out, that he needed to be restrained. Well, what they didn't realize with it was that this was a man who loved deep pressure. So he would act out to get access to something he really wanted, which was deep pressure. So we want to be very careful and make sure that we proactively provide them with an outlet for their sensory needs. Give people a safe area or a calming area, and knowing when to go and to kind of calm yourself is a really good strategy for our folks. Sometimes we need to do task analysis, and we have an article on our website about doing task analysis. But you have to know and understand each step that you teach individuals. Our folks, it takes them much longer to learn things oftentimes, and so we may have to break things down a little bit more. Visual supports, and I've talked about that, but again, our folks are visual learners. And by the way, about 70% of us are visual learners as well. Rules and routines and expectations that are clear. I think the consistency of expectations in the family. So understanding what you really expect from the individual. And I think also if you have your child in a school program or an adult program or an ABA program, find out what those expectations are across all programs. And as much as you can be consistent, that will be really helpful for the individual because they will understand how they're supposed to behave. I've talked about this before, but a calm and a safe and a predictable environment for them is really important. I know I've been working with one family, and one of the things that we've really worked on is creating that environment that is very calm for the individual so that they have a way of regulating themselves a little bit more. We also know that movement is an evidence-based practice, and that many of our individuals who have behavior difficulties, we need to build in movement. And I know oftentimes in behavior plans, I will write in movement, whether it's doing some yoga or it's doing some running or something, but kids need to have some movement. And you have to balance that out with minimizing some transitions, but movement is really important. And then build in reinforcement for our folks. They need to have direct reinforcement. They need to be reinforced specifically for what they're doing. So don't just say good job, but good job of setting the table. Good job of sitting at the desk. Good job. So tell them what they're being reinforced for. And you know that it's a reinforcer if it increases the behavior. And then again, that rapport and relationship building will be key. The other thing that I want you to think about is self-care. And we've been becoming really sensitive to this fact, especially coming through this pandemic, is that you all have to engage in some self-care. I've been involved with the Autism Society of America for many years, and was involved in chapters when I worked in Colorado and Illinois and Indiana. And I have seen firsthand the impact of stress on families. And don't apologize for taking care of yourself when possible, and so exercise and healthy eating, meditations. I've reduced my access to the news just to try to keep myself calmer these days because it's so wild. And, connecting socially with family and friends, know where your support comes from. We have a list of support groups across Indiana. I know that there are Facebook groups, but what I would tell you is make sure that you're around positive people. that you don't get into that negativity, because you're going to need people that are going to lift you up and are going to be supportive in a positive way instead of bringing you down. And laughter is really important. I know I have several friends who are mothers of children on the autism spectrum, and we used to just get together and have a once a month a get together and just laugh and tell stories and just really support each other. And then, establishing routines and setting goals for yourself is going to also be helpful. But we are here for you, and please feel free to reach out. I know some of the challenges that you all are going through are intense, are difficult to figure out. I Behavior is not all within an individual. Behavior is related to environment, expectations, relationships. And so part of what we have to do is to figure out the bigger picture of what's going on. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And there's my email address. Thank you.